All right, well, hopefully that gets you going this morning. My name is Daniel. I'm one of the ministers here at LeClaire. So glad to get to be with you today. Now, my wife and I, we have been raising our kids now for about 9 years. My oldest is going to be turning 9 this month now, and we had a really great streak of avoiding emergency room visits, but that all came to an end last year. Late in the month of September, my wife gave me a phone call one afternoon and said that our 5-year-old son, Canaan, had fallen out of a tree. Now, if you know my son, you would know that if anything can be climbed, he is going to climb it. We have to work so hard to just keep him off of things. I mean, even at our house, instead of just walking to his bedroom down the hall, he has to scale the walls like Spider-Man on the way down. He loves to climb, and he loves to get up high and to see things from a new perspective. And so he was in our backyard, climbed a tree, had fallen, and you know, my typical response when one of my kids gets hurt is just, well, it's probably fine. Just give him another minute or two, he'll calm down, and it'll all be fine. So she hangs up, but then about 15 minutes later, she calls again and says, I don't think everything is fine this time. And so I come home, and I see him there at the dinner table. I mean, he's still, you can tell, he's in a lot of pain. His arm has started to swell, and so he and I hop in the car, and we head to the emergency room. Now, a hospital can be a little bit of an intimidating place for a 5-year-old little boy, but he did a great job. And, we got to our triage room. He went in, did the x-rays, and then we came back. And a little bit later, the doctor came in and said, well, man, your arm is broken. And, it was the time of COVID, so we both had our masks on. So all I could see were his eyes, and I began to see these big blue eyes just well up with fear. I began to see the tears kind of start to climb, and I knew that he was terrified. I mean, as a kid, you don't want to break anything, let alone something on your own body. And that's a pretty strong word to break something. I mean, I remember being his age and learning for the very first time about somebody that had broken their leg. I had a neighbor that lived up the street, and one day my mom had told me that she had broken her leg, and I didn't even know what that meant or what that looked like in my mind. And I remember I thought about it all day long. And then the next day at school, we had a time in class where we have to write a sentence story and then draw a picture. And so I decided I'd write a story about someone breaking their leg. But this was the image that I had whenever that happened. Yeah, it's pretty intense. I'm pretty sure my teacher was like, what are you watching that you think this is what a broken leg looks like? So I knew that this was a terrifying experience. And so I came along and I said, Canaan, man, no one in your family has ever broken a bone before. That's so awesome. I said, it's going to be okay. It's going to heal. You're going to get a cast. And so, they came in, they gave him a splint, and he got a popsicle there. So he was good to go. But I kid you not 24 hours later, he was right back outside trying to climb that tree. I mean, he loves to climb. I mean, he loves to get up high and to see whatever he can see, to see, the roof of the house and the houses across the street. Maybe you were the same way. Maybe you loved to climb trees, or maybe you were that kid on the playground that would run to the swings and swing as high as you could so that you could see all the other kids on the playground. There's something exhilarating about getting to see things from a higher perspective. Now, there's a story in the Bible, a really unique story about a man who actually climbs a tree to get a better perspective. It's not to get a better perspective of the city that he lives in. He wanted to see Jesus. And I know today, Jesus doesn't just walk the streets down Governor's Parkway or Essex Drive for us to come out and to see him, but I do think that there are ways, like this man Zacchaeus, that we can position ourselves to see him more clearly, that we can position ourselves to experience our relationship with him more fully. I think there are ways that we can do that even today. And I think for many people today, I would argue that many Christians too, that maybe we continue to struggle with the weight of this world, with the shame of our sin, with the tense, difficult circumstances of a difficult relationship, or maybe the anxieties caused by our own fears. maybe because we've stopped positioning ourselves to see and to experience Jesus. Maybe we've stopped allowing our lives to intersect with the one who knows us better than anyone. But as we'll see today, all it takes is one encounter for someone's life to completely change. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be looking in Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 1. Now, we have been 3 weeks in this series called Press Play, and this is our VBS theme for the week, which begins tonight. And so if you've not signed up, or maybe you have kids that haven't been signed up, or maybe you haven't had a chance to sign up to help, we would love to have you. It's not too late. We're going to have a great week talking about how we can have confidence in God, and that when we see ourselves the way that God sees us, that we can have confidence to face any challenges that we might face in this world. And we can have confidence for a number of reasons and things we're going to talk about this week. We can have confidence because we are known by God. We are known by the creator of the universe. We can have confidence because we belong, that there is a group of people who have been redeemed that we belong to. We can have confidence because we are forgiven. And not only are we forgiven, but our lives can actually change. And we can have confidence because we can make a difference. And that's what we're going to be talking about all week long. I can't think of a better message for our kids to continue to root their lives and their identity in who God is and how He sees them. And here we started just a couple weeks ago. Andy asked this question of who is Jesus? And we saw that there's so much throughout history that Jesus has shaped from our ethics and our morals. And then last week we looked at Jesus calling His disciples, and we're reminded that we too are called to follow Him in various ways. And today we're going to look at a story that helps us know that we can have confidence because we are forgiven. And not only that, but our lives can truly change. So will you read along with me, beginning in chapter 19, verse 1. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead. He climbed a sycamore fig tree, just as the song says, to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Now, I know for many of you, this might be a story that you were familiar with if you grew up going to church. Maybe you learned the song. Now, I feel a little bad for this guy, Zacchaeus, because this is a really great story, and there's a lot that we can learn about how he responds and a lot that we can take away, but he's always going to be remembered as the short guy. So I always feel a little bad for him. So today, maybe we can redeem him a little bit. So Jesus is headed to Jerusalem. This is near the end of his ministry. He's headed to Jerusalem. He's headed to the cross. But on his way, he passes through this city of Jericho. Now, that city might ring a bell for you if you're familiar with the Old Testament. In the Bible, there are actually two Jerichos. There was the Jericho in the Old Testament where at the time when God was bringing his people into the promised land, Jericho was one of the very first cities that he allowed for them to come in and to conquer. And they didn't even have to lift a finger. All they had to do was go in and march around the city 7 times, and the walls miraculously came crumbling down. And if you remember the story, there was a character in that story named Rahab. She was a prostitute, and she actually had hosted some of the spies of Israel sometime before then. And because she did that, her and her family were spared from this oncoming destruction. And here we are again, ironically enough, that her very descendant would now be the one to be hosted by somebody in this society that would be deemed a sinner here in this very same city. Now, the New Testament Jericho obviously had been rebuilt. It looked a lot different than the one in the Old Testament. It was a lot more spread out, and it was actually a great place to go and visit because it boasted lots of rose bushes and these balsam groves, and it said that when you walked the streets, the air was just perfumed with the fragrance of flowers and plants. It would have been a remarkable place to see. And all of this, including its prime location, made Jericho one of the greatest and wealthiest cities in Palestine, which made it one of the greatest taxation centers in Palestine, which made Zacchaeus one of the greatest men you love to hate in Palestine. Now, Luke makes a point to tell us that Zacchaeus is a chief tax collector. And tax collectors were not very popular among the average people. They saw them often as traitors, people that were working to collect taxes for a foreign government that was here invading their space. And not only that, but they had a terrible reputation of taking more than they needed just to line their own pockets and cheating people out of their money. But if he didn't already stand out from the crowd because of his occupation, we see here, Luke tells us that he's vertically challenged. Probably not much more than about 5 feet tall by Mediterranean standards. Now, word has spread throughout Jericho about this Jesus guy. And I'm sure that many people had probably heard rumors about him healing the sick or giving sight to the blind. Maybe they heard rumors about this guy that actually kind of stood up to some of the religious leaders of the day. And if you're Zacchaeus, maybe you've heard some things about what he said about tax collectors. I mean, he actually had one of his own disciples was a tax collector. Maybe Zacchaeus knew who Matthew was, and so he wanted to get a chance to see him. In fact, just the chapter before this, Jesus is teaching a parable, and he actually talks about a tax collector. And he tells this story that there is this Pharisee who would have been, one of the religious leaders, and a tax collector. And he tells this story that they go to pray at the temple. And he says the Pharisee goes up to the temple, and he looks up to heaven, and Jesus says he prays about himself. He says, "Lord, thank you so much for not making me like one of the robbers or adulterers or like this tax collector over here." And then he goes on to boast about all the good things that he's done and what he's given and how generous he's been. And then Jesus tells about this tax collector who goes up to pray, and he says that he couldn't even look up to heaven. And he stands there, and all he can say is, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." And Jesus is asking the crowd, he says, "Who do you think went home that day justified before God?" And you can imagine the people thought, well, of course the Pharisee. I mean, they're the ones who know all the rules. They follow all the rules. They know everything they need to know. But he says, no, it was the tax collector. That those who humble themselves will be exalted. And so maybe Zacchaeus has heard rumors about stories like this that made people like him the hero of the story. Now, we don't know whatever the reason may be, maybe just the buzz of who Jesus was, but Zacchaeus is not going to miss his chance to see Jesus. And I think this is something important that Luke wants to convey throughout his gospel as we read about all these different accounts of people who meet Jesus. That some of the greatest moments of life change happen when people choose to go out of their way to meet Jesus. When we humbly recognize who this guy is and how he can truly help us. And for Zacchaeus to go out into the crowd, this would have been quite a step of faith, to be around people that don't like him very much. And you can just picture that day, him trying to find a spot along the road that he can fit in and just catch a glimpse of this guy. And I'm sure people were there making sure that he couldn't get his eyes on him. And so he sees a tree and he climbs into it. And I just love this image of him all alone in this tree and everyone else on the ground. His status as an outcast would just be reflected in that one scene. But as is often the case, Jesus targets those who are on the outs. This is what Luke says. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." How amazing would it have been for Jesus to acknowledge your status, to acknowledge who you are in front of everybody here, to acknowledge that you too are a son of Abraham. When so many others who might have been around, people that legitimately claimed themselves to be sons of Abraham, were the very ones that called him an outcast or made him feel like an outcast. Can you imagine the outpouring of graciousness that Jesus showed, how that might have impacted a man like Zacchaeus? I mean, Jesus could have stayed at so many other places. There are probably so many other people in Jericho that were more worthy to host him, that had better reputations, but he chose Zacchaeus. And this one encounter completely changed his life. Now, relationally and socially, I don't know if things ever changed for Zacchaeus. I don't know if all the muttering and the grumbling and the way that people viewed him, I don't know if that ever stopped. But I think at that point, what Jesus provided for him was far greater than simply changing his circumstances or maybe changing the way that people viewed him. Because what Jesus gave him and what matters most is that Zacchaeus' heart internally was changed. And on a day that he just wanted to get a better glimpse of Jesus, he left with a fuller view of who he truly was in light of God's love. And this is what completely changed him. And this is why I'm so excited to get to share with our kids this week, that when you see yourself as God sees you, it completely changes your life. And we know he was changed by the evidence of this newfound generosity that he showed. Now, I know that many of you might be in circumstances right now that you wish that you were not in. Maybe, like Zacchaeus, you kind of feel like you're out there all alone on a branch, apart from everybody else. Maybe, like Zacchaeus, there are people that write you off far too quickly. Maybe they fail to see you or fail to love you as the way that you feel you should be. Maybe you feel that you work so hard, but you can never seem to make ends meet. And every single day you look ahead and the future just seems so unknown. And the weight of that is just soul-crushing. I don't know what your situation is, but I do know that we serve a God who sees those whose circumstances might make them feel weak or make them feel broken for whatever reason. And who also longs for you to not give up and to continue to run to him, to come and meet him, the only one who has the power to change our circumstances, yes, but also has the power to give us the strength and the confidence to endure them as well. And I would love for God in all circumstances just to fix the problem and to change our circumstances, but it's the latter that truly develops in us a character and a perseverance and a faith that God desires most. And on this day, what mattered most to Zacchaeus now was how God viewed him, and that was enough to give him confidence. That was enough for his life to completely change from the inside out. And I think this is what Luke wants us to see time and time again as we see people encounter Jesus. And sometimes it doesn't take much for things to completely change. It can be very simple things. I think it often begins this way, that life change begins when we position ourselves to see Jesus. I think this was true for people in the Gospels, and I think it's still true for us today, that life change begins when we position ourselves to see Jesus. And here, Zacchaeus was not going to miss his chance. A couple years ago, I had the chance to mark off my one and only bucket list item. Now, if you know me, I like to watch tennis. I like to play tennis. I'm not very good, but I like to watch tennis, and I've always been a huge Roger Federer fan. He's just one of those athletes that I feel like was born for their sport, that when you watch, everything he does just seems effortless, and it's just a joy to get to watch. Now, I never imagined that I'd ever get to see him play in person. It's not easy to just hop on a plane and fly to London or Paris or even New York City, where some of the majors are played. But there are a couple tournaments here in the United States that some of the bigger names will come and play at. And one of those happens in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's kind of the warm-up event before the U.S. Open, usually that happens in September. So a couple years ago, I had a buddy that moved really close to Cincinnati, and I thought, I can go visit him and then maybe take a day to go to this tournament. And, who knows? Maybe I can get to see Roger play. But these are hard things to plan. I mean, athletes are always, canceling events at the last minute. They're pulling out, or they could be injured. You also don't know what athletes are going to be playing on what day, and I was only there one day, and I had to really research to try to pick the best day to go. Had to be early enough so that in case he got out of the tournament, I'd still get to see him. And so we picked our day, and things were going along. I mean, you also have to deal with weather sometimes, but it ended up, it was going to be a good sunny day. It looked like the tournament was going to go on, and so my wife and I get there. I mean, it was so incredible. Right when I walked in, I began to look at some of the practice courts and see some of these faces that I had seen play on TV for so many years. I got to see, Venus and Serena and Novak Djokovic and Maria Sharapova. But what mattered most was getting to see Roger play. And I knew he was playing later in the day. And one of the good things about these tournaments is you can go to the practice courts and you can watch players play like really close. And so I kept looking on my app to see when Roger was going to practice and where he was going to be. And all day long, as we were looking at other things, I just kept checking it. And I kept checking it. And so he was scheduled to be on one of the big practice courts. And about an hour and a half before he was set to practice, I looked and I saw at the very last minute they changed his court to a completely different court on the opposite side of the complex. So I told Kelsey, I was like, we have to go there now because I don't think people have seen this change. Like, we're one of the first ones to see it. So we can be there right in the front to see him. And so we, got there as quickly as we possibly could. And when I got there, like, no one was there. And I thought, oh man, did I make a huge mistake and miss my chance? But slowly, more and more people came and gathered. And we were right there on the front. And then sure enough, right at the time he was supposed to be there, Roger Federer came walking through onto the court. And I did what anyone else in this circumstance would do. I just started crying because I was so happy. But I got to tell you, there was nothing that was going to keep me from missing seeing him play that day. I mean, if I had to give up seeing all those other players so that I could watch him play, it would have been worth it. When we see the value of someone or something, we will do whatever it takes to not miss the opportunity to experience it. This is one of the most important aspects about this story here. Let me ask you a question. Are you still climbing trees for Jesus? Are you still climbing trees for Jesus? Are you still going out of your way to welcome the only one who can bring you peace, the only one who can heal your deepest wounds, the only one who can handle your greatest burdens, the only one who can actually change your heart? Here at LeClaire, we have a list of core values, and there's one that we kind of put above all the rest, and it's a transforming relationship with Jesus. Because we truly believe that nothing in this world can change our hearts like a relationship with Jesus. I mean, you can look throughout Scripture, you can see all the commands that we should follow and abide by, but there is no list that is exhaustive enough to help us handle all the things that this world may throw our way. The only way that we can handle that is by a living and active relationship with Jesus. It's through that we learn who he is, we learn about what he cares about, we learn about his heart, and that changes us. That's why this is one of our highest core values here. And it doesn't have to be some grandiose gesture of faith for God to use in life-changing ways. It doesn't have to be some great show of piety or some extravagant offering. God just desires an openness and a humility that says, I need you. I can't do this alone. It can be one decision, one prayer. It can be one moment of turning our attention to the Lord. Let me ask you again. Are you still climbing trees for Jesus? Are you allowing the course of your life to intersect with his? Are you living in such a way that each day you awake, he is the most important goal of your day, that if you get nothing else done, if there's nobody else that you talk to, that you've at least seen him? Because it's through him that we can experience true life change. Now, I know for many of us, stories like this can become all too familiar. And maybe the ways that we meet Jesus, the things that we do to encounter him, sometimes can just feel mundane. And sometimes they can lose out on their ability to, arise just our joy and our passion to follow him, to live out the life that he's called us to live. And if that's you, man, I've been there before. And I just want to encourage you to do whatever you possibly can to focus in on that relationship, because that is what matters most. We had a life group that we started last year with some young adults here at LeClaire. And, my wife and I have gotten a chance to be a part of this. And it was really great. As we got to know each other in those early months, we learned that so many of these, college students, some just out of college, really never grew up going to church. And so it was really fascinating to hear their experience as we were reading through the Gospel of Mark together. And when we were about halfway through, I just kind of asked this question, how does this impact you when you read about Jesus? I mean, some of them kind of really for the first time. And there's one girl, and I will never forget her response. I mean, she was new to the faith. She was baptized last year, and she said, I used to always be afraid to learn about religious things and to learn about God. But she said, the more that I read about Jesus, the more jealous I am of the disciples that they got to spend so much time with this guy, because I just love him so much. And I loved hearing her say that. One, because it was just good to hear people making that connection, but for me, it was so good just to be reminded of how all of this starts in the beginning. It's so easy to be caught up in doing all the right things and doing all the good things, and it really just boils down to a love of Jesus. And I was so encouraged to hear her say that. I love actually how Jesus puts it. As he's in Revelation chapter 2, he's talking to all these different churches. And there's one particular church in Ephesus that he speaks to, and he's kind of giving all these churches a bit of a progress report of a little bit of that. And he tells them, I admire all the work that you're doing. I admire your perseverance in the faith. I admire that you see those who claim to follow me but aren't really following me. But then he says this in verse 4 of chapter 2, I hold this against you. You've forsaken the love that you had at first. Somehow in their pursuit of their faith, they had lost the reason that they did it in the first place. And then he gives them a way forward. Consider, give thought to how far you have fallen. Repent and do the things that you did at first. In all your faithfulness and perseverance, don't lose sight of Jesus and how important he is. Don't forget the love that you had for him at the beginning. And we remember how important he is when we remember how far we have fallen. When we remember that we too were like Zacchaeus, alone in that branch, just helpless and hopeless, until one day Jesus came along. Because if this Jesus, who had yet to display his full power on the cross, could simply call up to a man in a tree, invite himself over to dinner, and that was enough to completely change his life, how much more can we trust the Son of God who came to this world to die for us? He changed Zacchaeus by calling up to a tree, but for you and me, he hung on a tree. If the former can change a selfish tax collector's greedy heart, what stone-cold, hard-hearted sinfulness can withstand the latter? And if that is the case, then let's make him the most important priority of our day. Let's not be people that miss the chance to see him and to meet with him. As we close, I just want to leave with you another set of words that Jesus speaks. A little bit after that church in Revelation, he says to another church there, he says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me." Jesus longs to have fellowship with us because he knows that it's that relationship that truly changes us. What might happen if we begin to genuinely position ourselves to see Jesus? If we genuinely position ourselves to hear that voice that is knocking at the door, if we actually answered that door. He's easily found. He's not hiding. He's walking in the streets longing for you to go out and to meet him. And I know some days maybe all you have is just a chance to go out and give him a glimpse, but sometimes that is all that is needed. Let's pray. God, we come to you today like that tax collector. We come humbly and we know that we are sinners, and God, we just pray that you would have mercy on us. Help us to be people that actively seek after you and actively position ourselves to hear your voice, because that is what is most important. I know there are times that we get caught up in just trying to do the right things and we get detached from that relationship with you. So I just pray that you would renew that this morning in each of us. That we could be a church that everything that we do comes out of an overflow of our abiding in you. Thank you so much for your mercy. Thank you so much for the extravagant love that you have shown and that you've shown time and time again. I pray that we would be people that see ourselves the way that you see us. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Now's the time in our service where we take communion, and every single week we have this chance to come and meet Jesus in this time. Kind of a way, a symbolic way to remember the sacrifice that he made when he died on the cross. So today, and as we sing this next song, and as you take time to take communion, I want to encourage you to take a moment to meet with him. To think about the words that we sing today, and just to remember that everything we do comes out of an overflow of our relationship with him. And maybe you're here today and there is a lot going on in your life. And maybe you just need somebody to pray with you. I'll be up here in the corner. If you just need someone to pray with, I'd love to do that with you. Or maybe you're here and man, maybe you've never made that decision to open the door for the very first time. And if that's you, we'd love to talk with you about that as well. We've got a really exciting week this week, man. I hope if you haven't had a chance to sign up to be a part of VBS, maybe this is another way to meet with Jesus this week, and we would love to have you here. Would love to encourage you to get to be a part of that. But this morning, will you stand as we sing this song for our time of communion?